Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Dev Theater, and I think you get bonus points for being a developer and showing up on the last day of a conference at 9:15 in the morning. I am already amazed. So my name is Shane McLaughlin. I work for Salesforce. I live in Houston. That is my GitHub and my Twitter handle, and the GitHub will come into play a little bit later because you're going to get some good stuff from this presentation. But first, it's the forward-looking statement slide. I don't expect to say anything today that's not current functionality, but if you ask a question and make me do it, please don't make purchasing decisions based on anything I say about what will happen in the future. All right, so our agenda today, I'm going to do a quick orientation on our process automation stack as it's changed over time, because if you don't look at it every year, there's new stuff you haven't noticed. And then we'll look at how ProcessBuilder exposes Apex and what that would look like for a business analyst who's trying to create ProcessBuilder processes using your Apex code. And then we'll spend the bulk of our session looking at how to make those Apex plugins for ProcessBuilder. And we'll go through examples starting from like simple 3 lines to some of the more complicated scenarios and the tips and tricks and gotchas that I've found building all this stuff out. And then at the end, you'll know where this stuff is. You can install it in your own org. You can copy and use my stuff if you like and make your admins happy. All right. So I'm going to introduce a persona. This is a guy named Bobby that used to work for me. And Bobby is a fantastic Salesforce admin. He can build anything that doesn't involve code. Bobby has written some triggers, and they're sort of like the triggers that you would write when you first start being a Salesforce developer, trying to keep it really simple. But anytime something got complicated, he would come to me and say, OK, I think I'm doing this, or I need some help with this, or I'm stuck. And so our goal is to make Bobby as powerful as possible so that you don't have to do work very often for the type of stuff that Bobby's going to ask for. All right, so process automation on Salesforce. In the beginning, and I go back to about 2011, I don't know what it was like before that, but we had workflow. And workflow could do 4 really simple things, and admins loved workflow. And everything else, they would ask you to write some Apex for. Oh, just write a little simple trigger, right? So this thing we had called flows, and originally called visual workflow. It had a couple of names. But the idea here was you had like choose your own adventure wizard type screens. And then at some point, Salesforce said it would be really cool if we could run these flows, because they do cool things like query things and iterate through records and do loops and database transactions. If we could kick off a flow from a workflow. And then this way, the Bobbies of the world will be able to do lots more than they could do. Okay? And this was a great idea. It's a really cool tool. It was really hard for the Bobbies of the world because you have to think like a developer. So if you've ever had your admin, or if you are an admin and you said, I'm going to do this flow thing, you're like, oh, you have to declare variables. You have to iterate collections and do all these things that if you're not a programmer to begin with, it's actually a different paradigm for you. And if you're a developer, you play with flows and you're like, I could have coded that faster than what I just did there, right? So this was a good first start. And then Spring 15, we had ProcessBuilder. Okay, which is one of my favorite things in the world. As soon as I saw this, I immediately fell in love with it. And if you were to pull out the Google and type in ProcessBuilder love song, the top search result there will be a YouTube video. I will express my feelings with an acoustic guitar. So the point of ProcessBuilder is that lots of things you used to write code for, you now can do as an admin. So you can do stuff in Chatter, you can create records, you can update records, you can do all sorts of things, including all those delayed actions that are actually really hard to do in Apex. Hey, wait 3 days and then do something, right? So that was the idea. And so ProcessBuilder has given admins a whole bunch of functionality that they never had before. And there's also an Apex plugin. So we now have the ability to write code for all the stuff that ProcessBuilder can't do, so that you can then say, here, Bobby, this is the thing that does what you want it to do. You never need to ask for that again on any object in the world, right? And so that's what our topic about is today. So first, I want to open up ProcessBuilder for those of you that haven't seen it, and take a look at what this is going to look like for the Bobbies of the world. So I'm going to log into Salesforce quickly and escape out of PowerPoint. All right. All right. So if you haven't used ProcessBuilder before, because you're a hardcore developer or you kind of skipped this when it was released, I'm going to walk you through what this looks like. And really, we're interested in where those Apex things show up. So this will load my list of processes. And I'll pick one that's got an open one. All right. So before we do that, I want to do one quick interactive question here. All right. How do you lock a record in Salesforce? OK, what else? How have you locked records in the past when someone says, OK, when this opportunity closes, I want no one to ever be able to edit again? What do? What's that? Validation rules? Yep, you can write. So make every field invalid if you ever change it after a certain status happens, right? That's the one option. What's the other one? OK. Anyone made a fake approval process that has no approvers? And then you have to go write a trigger that submits it to the fake approval process so it ends up locked, right? And then next week, when Bobby's VP says, OK, that's great. Can you lock accounts after they get a certain, do something like that? And then you're like, OK, great. I get to write another fake approval process, and I write another trigger on some other object to lock a record, all right? So I want to show you what this looks like in ProcessBuilder with Apex, because I think it's a little bit better. All right, so this is ProcessBuilder. If you haven't seen it before, we're going to pick an object. And in this case, we've renamed the account object customer. I have some sort of criteria. So this is like Visio, right? And I'm going to say the status is hot, but it could be the opportunity is closed, whatever the admin decides to do. And I have an Apex action here that says lock it, OK? And if I want to delete this, I'll walk you through what it looks like to set this up. So Bobby would click Add Action. There's all types of things that people can do in ProcessBuilder. And there's this one that says Apex. And if you install a fresh org and you say Apex, there's nothing in there, right? So that's what we're going to build. So our action is lock it. And then I have all of these Apex classes. And do you want to delete a record? You can't do that in ProcessBuilder. Do you want to give a thanks badge? Do you want to refresh a dashboard? OK, we'll walk through all of these examples. But here, just lock a record, right? So we lock the record, and then we can assign variables to it. And so Bobby's could say, the only variable I exposed was record IDs. So he's going to put in what do you want to lock. And then I'm going to use a reference. And from here, Bobby can lock anything in the world that he can get to from the account that started this. So for example, I could lock the account ID. There we go. Customer ID. We renamed it. So I could lock that. I could lock related things. I could lock all the opportunities on this. I could get to anything from ProcessBuilder. All right. So that's our overview of what this looks like. Cool. How do you make those? All right. How do you give your Bobby all sorts of little tools like that? So the first one we did, the one I just showed you, this is the code behind it. OK? This was the very, very easiest thing I could possibly think of to do a ProcessBuilder block of. So there's a class in Apex that came out about a year ago that adds to the approval class. It has a lock method and an unlock method. And so what I've done here is I've got my Apex class. You'll see right in the middle, I've got invocable method. And that just is an annotation that says this can show up in ProcessBuilder and flows. OK, so really simple. That little ProcessBuilder, when it gave me those Apex lists, it's just looking for things with this annotation. And then there's a label there, because I named my method lock record, OK? But I wanted it to say lock a record, make it really nice and friendly for the user. So you can relabel them. They don't have to be your method names for with the user. That's not required. You can default it there. And then I'm going to pass in a list of record IDs. So ProcessBuilder can always be running in bulk mode, right? It could always be, you updated a spreadsheet or like 5 records changed at one time. So we're always going to work with a collection. And in this case, it's the record IDs. And then once you're in there, you just call whatever logic. And this is the simple logic, lock the records. And that's all it does. OK? So we'll do another one. Another thing you can't do in ProcessBuilder is delete records. So this is our method for deleting. So again, invocable method. I've got a nice label for Bobby. I'll give you all this code. It's all on GitHub. All right, but thank you. You'll see a couple things that are familiar. If you've been working with Apex triggers very much, bulkification is still a good idea, right? Because this could happen in bulk. So we're going to work with a collection, and at the end, we're going to do a database operation. We're not going to put that inside our for loop, right? So all the things you've ever learned about Apex triggers still apply. What you won't see in Apex triggers that's kind of new for ProcessBuilder is generics. Okay? So usually when you're doing a trigger, you're working with accounts that happened or opportunities that happen. But we want to work with the generic S object. And unless you are doing really fancy things in Apex, you don't normally touch this. But this is what lets us make it work for anything that Bobby could ever put into that process builder operation. All right. And then I have another scenario where we're going to have a user follow a record in chatter. Okay? There's some stuff in the App Exchange that used to do this. People have done it with triggers for a really long time. But I want to automate chatter follows. And I will show you what that looks like, because it looks a little bit different in Process Builder. So instead of doing this one, I'm going to say, have a user follow a record. Right? That's really, really clear and usable. But what you'll see happen here, look at the variables. There's 2 of them. Okay? So I'm going to pass in what needs to be followed and who needs to follow it. Right? And I could also do these as references. I could use a formula to like get your boss's 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 boss if I needed to through relationships. So this is what we call a more complex input. So it's got a group of variables there. And I'll show you how that looks in Process Builder and how it looks in Apex. All right, so here's the link. And all right, so this is a chatter follow. And you'll see up at the very front, it looks like it did before, invocable method with our label. But we're not passing in a list of records. We're passing in a list of chatter follow. Okay, there's not really such thing as a chatter follow. The correct name of this is entity subscription. But the way we're going to do this in Process Builder is we have a inner class, and you can name it whatever you want to. I named my chatter follow because that was easy for me. And then we have variables inside it. These are the 2 variables that show up for Bobby when he works with them in Process Builder. And I can mark them required, so they show up on the screen by default. If I didn't mark them required, Bobby would have to click the plus button, and he could add more variables, right? And then I can give them individual labels. So you need to give them types, and you need to give them labels. But this lets you add as many variables as you need in that box so that your admins can do whatever they need to do with it. I'll show you a couple other things in this class that I think are kind of interesting, because it brings up some questions about the complexity here. If you have a list of records that need to be followed by a list of users, there might be some duplicates there, right? So here's an easy way to get rid of that, which is throw them to a set and then throw them back to a list, right? And that saves a little bit of work for you on the Apex side. You also have to think about error handling and what do you want to do with some of the scenarios. So if you know what's in your org, it's really easy. If you're an ISV and you're making something for the App Exchange, or sort of like anyone could use this, you might want to think about what happens if this org doesn't have chatter? Or what happens if they try to follow something that doesn't have a feed tracking turned on? Like there isn't something to follow, right? So I have done some really inelegant things, which is write a debug statement and fail silently. Okay. If I were trying to make this more sophisticated, I would probably notify Bobby that someone's trying to follow something. His process that he built is doing something that's not logical, and he may need to know. All right. So I have simple error handling. Do whatever you feel like you need to for your own stuff. All right. So that is how we do complex inputs with multiple variables. Okay. So I'm going to go up a level of complexity. Anyone ever got a MixedDML error? Yeah, some of you know what that is? OK. So here's the scenario. When Bobby creates a new user in Salesforce, or some foreign system provisions a user in Salesforce, we want to automatically assign permission sets to them. So if I create a sales rep or a sales manager in Chicago, I give them this permission set and this permission set and this permission set based on their location and their job title or profile or all kinds of stuff. But what happens is you can't update a user and update a permission set in the same transaction. Okay? And you would deal with this if you were writing a trigger as well. So we're going to get around that using an app-future method, like we always do. And that brings up an important gotcha for Process Builder. All right, so this is the permission set. Nothing you haven't seen before. That you've seen, this you've seen. But what I can't do is have invocable method and any other annotation on the same method. Okay? So that stuff that I need to do in an app future needs to be somewhere else. Okay? And then I can call it from my invocable method. So I have to chain them because you can't put multiple annotations on that one. Okay? Other things in Salesforce, you can do that. Like I can put Aura enabled and remote action on the same method, but you can't with invocable. And just like always, there's some, if you read the code, there's some extra things that we're doing here where we're going to make a future transaction and you need to serialize and deserialize some stuff because you can't pass in objects. There's some other nuances that have nothing to do with Invocable Apex, but I did want to show you what that looked like. So if you have another method, you can call it from your invocable method, but you can't do multiple annotations. All right. And let's see. One more. How do you refresh a dashboard from Apex? Anyone ever done this? Anyone ever been asked to do this? No? OK. Yeah. There is no dashboard.refresh method. I wish there was. But you see this all the time where someone's got a nice Salesforce dashboard built, and the VP goes in and looks at it, and unless you hit that refresh button, or unless it's been scheduled to run, it's not showing live data. So you closed a whole bunch of big deals on the last day of the quarter, and the VP goes in and is like, oh, wait, we're not going to make our number or whatever. So we want to be able to automate dashboard refreshes. OK? No idea how to do this in Apex? OK. You can't. All right. So we're going to actually make a call out to our own REST API because the REST API lets you refresh a dashboard. OK? So we're going to make a call out from Apex to our own Salesforce REST API and run that dashboard refresh so that every time some big event happens, like an opportunity closes, we're going to update our dashboard automatically. OK? Anyone know the current Apex callout limit? How many of these could we have running simultaneously? What is it? 10? OK, I have no idea. I'll tell you why I don't care in a second. So let's go look at the code. All right, this is the class for a dashboard refresh. So we're going back to simple variables because I just need the ID of that dashboard. OK, so we're going to keep life easy. I'm going to do this little move here, which is, hang on. PowerPoint on a Mac is the worst thing ever. Yes, OK. So you've seen this before. All I'm passing in is a dashboard ID, right? But we're going to do this because what's happened over time is Salesforce tends to increase the limits as, I don't know, we get faster computers or something. So rather than hard code that number to be 10, we're going to ask what that number is every time. And then we're going to make our callouts. We're going to group them in batches. OK, so if that batch is 10, we'll put 10 together. If it's 200, we'll put 200 together. And just like we did before, we'll use our callout method in a future. So our invocable method calls something else. And then if you've done REST callouts from Apex, this will look familiar. But I'm just going to call the Salesforce API. And it lives here, along with my dashboard ID. And we'll get the request. And again, I'm sort of naive here, and I'm failing silently and just writing a debug message. If I was being nice, I'd notify Bobby that this dashboard's not refreshing for some reason, or maybe the dashboard doesn't exist and he typed the wrong number. I'm not sure. But that's what you would want to do there. So this is kind of getting into more complexity. But you'll see if I needed to add a whole bunch of other things, like maybe an authorization token or some other parameters, I could have did what we did for Chatterfollow and just added more variables to it. So maybe one of the things I have in the package I'm not going to show you today, but it's on GitHub if you want to look, is a generic callout. What's the endpoint? What's the REST token? Build a body in ProcessBuilder. So now I can do callouts from ProcessBuilder for Bobby. All right. Yep, we did that already. OK. So you go home from Dreamforce and take Monday off, and then you show up on Tuesday. And you install this package, and you tell your admin, hey, you can do dashboard refreshes from Salesforce now. Knock yourself out. It will fail. Does anyone know why? What are we missing? OK. What's that? Yeah. You create a process. You set it running. You pick a dashboard ID. What is it? Security, right? All callouts from Apex need a remote site setting. Okay? And people don't think about this for us sometimes. They're like, oh, I'm calling the Salesforce REST API from Salesforce. That should be OK, right? Nope. You need to explicitly add that remote site setting. So on the code I'll show you, that's in the setup documentation. But no one ever reads the setup documentation. And they'll probably eventually be like, why is this not running? And because it's failing silently and not notifying Bobby, you won't get that error. All right. So just a little hint there. All right. So I think I've covered most of the stuff I want to show on tips, tricks, and gotchas. But I'm just going to do a recap. So inputs to a process builder flow can be primitives. They can be a specific object. they cannot be the generic object. Okay? So it works really well to pass in record IDs and then have Apex figure out what that thing is with generics, because you can't just pass in anything. And then also it can be a list of interclass, which is what you always want to use when you have like more than one variable and you want those several inputs to show up in ProcessBuilder. Okay. For whatever reason, ProcessBuilder can't submit the original object. So the account that this started on, you can submit the record ID, but you can't submit that whole record. Like you could its children or something like that. I could say, or I could have an opportunity and I could do something to the account, but I can't submit the opportunity itself. So use record ID for that. All of the methods that I have in here are public static void. They don't return anything, okay? Because ProcessBuilder can't do anything with that return, okay? Flows can. So if you're building something that may be used in a flow, and you might do something with that variable, like assign it and use it in the next step of the flow, feel free to return something. It won't break ProcessBuilder, but it doesn't do anything in ProcessBuilder, okay? My least favorite is one invocable method per class. Okay, so my first thought, oh, I'll put lock and unlock in the same class. Nope. Okay, for whatever reason, we have a strict rule here. And then static methods only. So just like your remote actions and your Aura enabled, they have to be static, no member variables and all that. We've talked about how generics are useful. So take an ID and get whatever type of record that is. We've talked about error handling and how I did very little of it and how you might want to do more. We talked about bulkification, callouts, and MixedDML. Okay. My request here, I built a lot of these. I put them all out open source on GitHub. If you are working at your company on Tuesday when you go back to work, and you find something that's just so generic that, like, if it's for your company and it's your own specific stuff, feel free to keep that private. But if you're like, my Bobby needs this, but like actually all the Bobbies of the world would use this, all right, feel free to put it on GitHub and you submit me a pull request or something like that. I will totally add you to the package. I've done that with someone already who built the badge thing that gives chatter badges for people, which we thought was pretty neat. The next thing is, hey, I have a lot of triggers. Can I move this stuff out, right? And if you did the triggers the way that we normally teach people to do triggers, where I have the actual trigger and then all the logic lives in another class, right? It makes it really easy because I replaced this with an Apex invocable and I still call my same logic, because I bet you have test coverage on this, and I bet this is like working and you don't want to mess with it, right? So just put it, instead of the trigger wrapping it, you have the ProcessBuilder wrapping it, okay, for Invocable Apex. All right, I will show you where this stuff lives, and then we will have, I don't know, like 5 or 6 minutes for questions, and I hope you have some. And if you do, there's a couple mics there, so if you already have your questions, we'll do that. All right, so I am on GitHub. This is me. This repo lives at ProcessBuilder blocks. That was my catchy mark. That's my best marketing thing I could come up with. So all the code is here. It is not supported by Salesforce, even though it worked for Salesforce. So treat this as code that you found on the internet from some guy, right? It's not an official Salesforce product. I do have demo videos of most of these that kind of does a walkthrough of how it's used, and it just walks you through. Oh, record sharing. You want to automate record sharing? Do you want to? We did permission sets. We did dashboards. We didn't do thanks badges. Debugging ProcessBuilder is really hard. Sometimes you get like this email that has all the errors in it, but sometimes you might just want to write a system.debug. So there's a block for that. We did lock. There's unlock. You like that? And you can use it in flows too for your nasty flows that have debug problems. We did chatter follow. Rerun your lead assignments. So when something happens to a lead and you want to rerun the assignments automatically instead of having to go, click that button, that's all there for you. So that's where this lives on GitHub. And this is my favorite thing, which is the deploy to Salesforce button. This takes the package XML and will install it. Feel free to do it in a sandbox or in production. All right. So with that, we will take any questions that you hopefully have been dying to ask. Yes, can you go to the microphone and do it? Because I think they're recording this. So no pressure.
With the calls sending the arguments from ProcessBuilder to the Apex classes, does it strictly enforce the data types that are sent, or can you get into errors if you attempt to send the wrong data type that the class method is expecting?
It is going to... That's a good question. I'm putting most of mine in as strings because I want to give the admin the flexibility to build them with a formula builder or like grab them off of things. And so most of those things, if you're working on the declarative side, aren't really returning ID fields. They're really dealing with strings and numbers and stuff like that. And so I know that if you send strings, I'm casting, like in the record ID, I think I'm casting that to an ID. The question is, if it's a string, it turns into if I try to use it as an integer, I'm not sure. I assume that the standard Apex rules apply, but I know certain things like remote actions tend to cast stuff properly when they're coming in. So I would say assume it doesn't, and then if you make a mistake, you might get lucky and it works just fine. But assume you need to use proper types.
And sort of a follow-up question, again on arguments and methods. If you have overloaded methods in your class, will there be some warning, or does ProcessBuilder brilliantly and magically understand that?
Yeah, don't use overloaded methods. If you go back to the code samples, there's really only one variable input. And so if we're working with multivariables, they always go back to that inner class. So I'll show you, look at the structure again. So there's always a list of one thing, right? And if you need more inputs, you do them like this, and that's what shows up there. So what you would do is maybe some null handling. So if no one fills out that fifth variable of my 5 that are in this inner class, what do I do if it's null? You can handle that in Apex, but there's no way to pass in like 3 lists of something. Okay, it's always going to take one list of things. Yeah, and then I'll get you. Sorry, I just saw you.
So on this example, how does it bulkify? Because you're in the process builder, it looked like a single instance of the ID and a single instance of I forget the other object. But
can you repeat that last part? I didn't hear you.
In the process builder for this one, it looked like a single instance of the ID and a single instance of whatever the second argument was. It didn't look like a bulk list. How does it translate that?
Sorry. Yeah, the paradigm here is a little bit weird. So we're always passing in a list of things, but that list is going to happen on every one. So I'm going to pass in a record. And so think of it like a trigger, right? You might be changing one record, or you might be changing all of them. And so you want to then iterate those, right? So it could be that one user needs to follow one record, and it's this user and this ID, right? And then we're going to do that one chatter follow. But let's say that I have 10 of them, 10 users and 10 records, or this user needs to follow 10 records. Like, you're now the account owner, follow every opportunity and every case, that's on there. That would show up as a whole bunch of chatter follows on that one transaction, right? Does that make sense? Okay, good.
Hi. My org has a lot of chatter-free users.
Yes.
And you could run into weird issues when you have triggers and it's a chatter-free user, because we have a custom history object for tracking changes on the user record for compliance reasons. And if it's a chatter-free user, the trigger will fail because they don't really have API access. Do chatter-free users have access to ProcessBuilder? Is this kind of a workaround to that?
I don't know. I've never tried that with a chatter-free user. I'm not even going to speculate on what would happen. Yeah, go home and try that. And there's a group for this, and if you don't mind posting it, I'd love to hear the answer and get that follow up. Yeah, edge cases, chatter free. Yep. Go ahead.
My question is, you invoked a future method from within the invocable method. Could you invoke a queuable instead of a future?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, so you've been watching some of the other presentations on asynchronous Apex and queue and flex queue and stuff. Yeah, you can do anything you want with other methods. So you could kick off a batch and see if the batch is running. You could do, I was using future because it's easy and fast. So, laziness, I guess. Yep, good questions. I have 51 seconds on the clock if anybody has anything they really want to ask. And otherwise, I will hang up the mic and we can talk if you want to say hi or high fives or ask further follow-up questions that you didn't want to ask in front of the group. Thank you, everybody.